So, Ashley, thank you for joining today at James & James HQ. Ashley, you come from Neo PR. Can you tell us a little bit around what Neo do?
Yeah, Neo PR is a public relations company. We help our clients get heard above the background noise by putting active publicity out there in the marketplace about them.
And what do you mean by active publicity?
Well, active publicity is about getting out there with a message which resonates with an audience. So it really is finding a subject that's interesting for the readership of the publication. And if you think about a publication, they're trying to get their publication printed every month. So they really want to be talking to the audience, their audience. So what we do is we're getting our clients' messages into those publications to be read by that audience. And the interesting thing about that is that it's not just about putting marketing message out to the publication, because the journalist doesn't want to.
When I think of PR, I'm always thinking of a press release.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I guess, what you're saying.
That's very traditional PR, yes. And if you've got a news-based item, if you've got something which is of interest news-wise, then yes, a press release is appropriate at that point. So you're announcing a new product, something like that. But actually, if you want a conversation with your potential prospects, that's more about thought leadership. So it's the why rather than the what.
One of the things that's really interesting for our clients, at James & James, obviously very e-commerce-led clients, everyone's selling online, and from what we see, a lot of them are advertising on Instagram, Facebook, pay-per-click, and they're kind of traditional. And I guess do you think there's an expectation from those maybe smaller, fast-growing companies that PR is for the big boys? PR is what Coca-Cola do.
If they've got a traditional view of PR, yes, because people associate it with very large brands. But actually, if you want to get a message across, the widest audience you can get at is by using PR. Yeah. If you're doing pay-per-click or an advert or something, you've narrowed down your audience to something very specific, so you're willing to spend money on it. But PR reaches the whole audience, potentially, from the nationals to broadcast to trades. You can get at everybody with a fairly simple message. So it's more difficult to be targeted with PR, but it does reach a much wider audience. What's your experience of PR?
Well, as a business, we've done quite a bit. You've seen the brand that out there quite a lot for James & James, and I think for me it's been important that we do pay-per-click, and that's about driving inquiries to the site directly. But a lot of those companies come to us because they know why we're here. They know that we're a challenger brand in the market, that we do something differently, that we're here ultimately with content like this to try and help clients scale their company. And I think that's a difficult message to get across in one of those little AdWord banners that you put on there.
Yeah, it's more of a conversational piece.
It's about creating that. And interesting, one of the other things that I know will come up from people that talk to us about these things is influencers. I don't know if that's something you've had much exposure to.
Yeah, influencers do play their part. I mean, journalists are influencers at the end of the day, independent journalists especially so. There are lots of, and that's my world, there's a lot of independent journalists who will write a story and then put it into a publication rather than write it for the publication. Yeah. So it's their view of the world that's coming across, and it's our job to influence the influencers. So.
Well, I was actually quite interested to see, I think Bedford College have now got a proper influencer qualification, so you can now go as a college course and actually become an influencer. Not quite sure the success rate from that. How does that work with PR? Is that something that you normally go to an agent to try and find those people? And I guess more so now, I'm just wondering, with the kind of, we've got some clients here with really modern, innovative, products that are completely different, that are quite interesting products in their own right. And other people have maybe got a new brand of clothing. Are there certain ones that you think that are more influencer-led versus fashion versus kind of like newsworthy?
Yeah, it depends on the product, on the proposition, really, as to whether influencer is worth it or not. Because they can be expensive, of course, influencers.
Yeah.
There are
that's
some.
How they make their money. That's how they make their living, isn't it?
And the more popular they are, the more they'll charge for the services. But actually, they also want to be faithful to the fact that they are an influencer, and they will do non-paid for stuff. So if they really find a brand that's innovative or topic that's innovative, they'll go up on their own and talk about that because they want to build their own profile in the market.
I guess that comes back to having, as you said initially, it's about having that kind of a purpose, isn't it? Having a real meaning. We've got some clients here who've got some great products, but actually what's more powerful than their products is their story.
Yes. Yeah, it's more about the why than the what. The what is great, it's bells and whistles, it's a different colour, a different shape, a different quantity, but actually the why behind it is really important. And that's where PR plays a big part, because we can talk about the what, but actually we want to talk about the why.
And to what extent do you think, if you look at all the kind of the cliche, the iPhone, and all these kind of products that have revolutionised the world, to what extent do you think it's the story that's changed more than the product? Obviously the product's got to be good, the product can't be rubbish, but to what extent do you think the hype and the media and the PR has actually played more of a part maybe than the product?
That's a really tough one. It's a really tough one, because look at Apple, everyone's favourite pocket accessory. They really did the brand very, very well, but they've got some fantastic products.
Well, then you look at Fire Festival, which did the brand fantastically well and had absolutely zero product.
Sorry, who was that?
The Fire Festival,
yes.
The famous festival that never happened.
Yeah.
People camping out, in
that was it.
refugee tents on a deserted island. So, obviously, the brand, I guess, we were saying, is the brand's got to be faithful. The marketing and PR's got to be faithful to the product. You can't make stuff up.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And it's really important for that faithfulness is really important. I think if you're going to talk to an audience, you've got to be from the heart. And I think people forget that, especially in the business consumer world. It really is about talking about your brand focus and making sure it works for the audience.
I'm going to ask you a really tough question now. This is probably slightly off topic from PR, but once you've captured those people, how important is it to create a blog or an online place where you can actually build, some of our clients have got actual, online communities, chat rooms and discussion rooms where people can actually talk about the product. Not many companies have that, but how important do you think it is to keep that conversation going, outside the media once you've built it?
They say today's news was yesterday or tomorrow's chip paper.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely right. You've got to keep that story going. PR is about consistently coming out with a message, going out to the audience with a message, and making sure it's interesting, and keeping it interesting. And if you can start a conversation, if you can be the narrative in the marketplace and get a conversation going between customers even by keeping on with that PR, then that's the thing to do.
And I guess then there's that big difference, isn't there? When we talk about PR, again, the traditional view, it's something we write, goes in the newspaper. But actually it might be then, I guess, that some of that PR is on your own website. Because if you spend all that money getting into the press to do the advertising, now do you want to keep it going on your own blog? It's a lot cheaper to maintain.
Yeah, in my world that's called self-publishing.
Yeah.
So you'll publish obviously to media, but you'll self-publish as well. You've got to get those two the right way around. You've got to make sure the media can consume it first before you publish it on your own website.
And it's interesting actually, because I'm thinking like, how many e-commerce companies do I know that've got a blog? And I think there's a real split, isn't there? There's those that are very content-led.
Yeah.
It's all about the content, and there's great product behind the content. And I'm thinking you've got a couple of healthcare clients where it's all about their content, how to do their skin regimes, how to do all their help and advice, and they sell product.
Yes.
And there's other websites where it's a product website, they sell product, and that's kind of, that's it. And I just think there's quite a strong divide there in strategy, really.
There is, and I think it's worth trying PR. That's the key thing about this. If you have got a very product-focused company on a product, you think the product will stand on its own 2 feet, that's great. But actually talking about it in the market, talking about the why behind the product, why you've brought that product to market, and where does it fit in the market is quite important.
Just thinking, because again, we work with some big brands here, we also work with a lot of smaller companies that are really keen to get on that ladder. What's the easiest way they can get some PR out there, affordably without necessarily having to go to an expensive agency and pay for advertorial and everything? How can they try it a bit and see whether it's right for their product?
By self-publishing. So I think the thing is work out what your message is, make sure that message resonates with the audience, test it with the audience. You've got a captive audience, they're called your customers. So your existing customers, find out what they're thinking, what would resonate with them, and then take it out to market. So get friendly with some journalists in your space. You can talk to journalists directly. You don't need a PR agency. I'd like you to have a PR agency, but you don't need one. You can speak to journalists directly, especially if it's an interesting subject. See if it resonates with the journalist. If the journalist thinks it will resonate with the audience, and you've started your PR journey right there.
So it really is something that there's no excuse basically for not doing it in a way.
There's no excuse for not doing it, though it helps to know what you're doing. Most people do make the mistake of sending marketing material to journalists, and that's going to upset a journalist very quickly because they're not about sales and marketing messages. They're about the why, the essence behind it. So
some of the more cynical here might say that actually they don't want to have to write something themselves, they'd rather pre-written for them.
Yeah, a lot of them do. A lot of them take stuff that's already been written and then publish it. But they're not going to. Remember, their customer is their readership. And their readership, if they start reading sales and marketing messages, is not going to read the publication next month. So it's a story, what they want. If you can tell a story, a convincing, compelling story to a journalist, and they think their readership will like it, then they'll publish it.
And I think that comes on to something I believe in very strongly when we do some of the marketing and talk about James and James. Actually, we talk more about our clients. We talk more about the successes and the stories that they've had, because that resonates more with our audience. The people who are growing fast companies, or got fast-growing companies that want to scale, they're more interested in reading content that's about that than they are reading marketing material saying, how many fulfillment centers we've got and everything else. So I think, for me, that touches on a really strong point, which is, if you're going to do marketing, you need to make sure it's what people want to consume, not just about you. It's about your audience.
Yeah, and that's the classic split between advertising and marketing, really. If you want a message to get across that does sell, that's marketing speak, you pay for advertising. If you want a story, it's PR.
Two topics which we really shouldn't talk about, but we really have to talk about, so COVID and Brexit and the implications that's had. We've certainly seen some changes in the market. What's been the impact on that on the kind of PR marketing? Has it made a big difference?
An absolutely huge change, yes. The rate at which people are consuming information now online, in media, rather than going to trade shows or events has changed. It changed, obviously, when we were all locked down and wearing masks and wondering where all the flour went. At that point, PR really came to the fore because you're communicating with media that people get at in their own homes or on their work laptops or on their phones. So the world really has come to getting the messages right in PR. It's very difficult now to go and meet somebody in person. We're in person, great, but we haven't been able to meet for 2 or 3 years.
No, it's been quite long. We were our first trade show for a long time coming up, and it does seem like a strange world to get back into.
It is, yeah.
To what extent do you think those trade shows, are they going to come back? Are they still worth the investment in your view?
I think they're going to become much more specialist and much more targeted. And I'm not sure we're going to go back to those days where there were almost villages of trade show halls, and people would spend a week down there. But I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. It's going to be very much more focused.
And is that because people just become more self-aware of the time they're spending on this and they want to be productive in their day?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being on back-to-back Zoom calls during the day rather than a long lunch, it's changed the world.
And has that leveled the marketing? We talk about smaller, fast-growing companies. They're in a way buying media from the same place that Coca-Cola and Pepsi and all the other companies buying the slots. Has it made the market more competitive, or has it made it harder? Has it made it easier?
I think it's made it easier, but I think there's a really key point here. The smaller you are as a brand, the more projection you can do out there in the market, because you're not afraid to say things which are slightly controversial or slightly different in the market. When you get as big as a Coca-Cola, you'll be very careful with your marketing and your PR message, because it's got to be very honed and very succinct. So actually, the smaller, the braver, more guerrilla tactics. Go out there, be brave, and really talk to the market about what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I guess once you're listed, a proper listed company, anything you say is going to be held against you for years to come. But smaller companies, it's about getting people to be aware of the brand necessarily, and maybe there's memories of the bad things. If you do mess something up, don't stick around. Dare
to be controversial. Dare to be forthright. And get the message out there. That's really important. That's what James and James are doing as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Thank you for this. But are there any other companies you see that have done that really well? That have come from very small beginnings and really challenged the market in a way of their perception?
Gosh, there's been so many. None come to the front of mind, but there've been so many. I think the really key thing is they're always the brave ones in the market. They're always daring to do something different in the market, even if their product is. Even there are products out there already in their marketplace. I was
just thinking, Innocent Smoothies was one that's kind of coming to my mind, which is, if we maybe slightly unjust, but it's fruit juice in a bottle. It's not revolutionary in inspired product marketing. It's not outside the realms of any manufacturer to make. But I guess they've got a very strong brand, haven't they?
Yes. Yeah, it works very well. Are there any brands in your portfolio that really stand out for you?
We've got one. We've got a company called Gandhi's. They do backpacks, but their whole story is around the founder lost his parents in a tsunami in Indonesia, and a percentage of the proceeds from the backpacks, which are all about exploring his travels, because their family was kind of spending years of their life travelling, but those proceeds go back to help the villages and education of where we grew up. And I think that, again, that's a website I was talking about earlier. There's a lot of blog content, there's a lot of great press, and it's about the story. The products are great, but actually the business is about the story. And we've got quite a few. Hannah Sullivan as well does the skincare of Dragon's Den, and her brand again is all about her story, her fight against eczema, and how she struggled to find products. And again, she's got a huge following community and forums online where people discuss skin and their issues and everything. And there's a kind of support, almost a support network of people who had difficulty because of skin conditions. And in a way, I think someone said, they've found a place where they can be open and talk about it, and they can also buy the product that's helped as well. But I think
that Dragon's Den, I watched that episode, that Dragon's Den. What great publicity that was.
I know.
That's PR squared to get onto Dragon's Den. Absolutely.
I think you almost don't care whether you get the investment.
But no, it's not for that purpose at the end of the day. I mean, you might get a Dragon on board, but actually, just being on that program, getting that publicity is fantastic.
The final bit, we're launching a West Coast fulfillment centre later this year. We're looking at Canada, Australia. International is always slightly harder. We just talked about some English speaking, or US English speaking countries at least. How hard is it with PR to get a message that resonates globally? Do you have to have a UK blog, a US blog? How easy is that for
some messages will cross border, certainly, especially English speaking messages. Some don't. Sometimes you have to be in the local market. And I think the really important about the American market, it's huge from a publicity perspective. And it varies between East and West Coast. So there are publications, just East Coast publications and West Coast publications. So actually, you've got to be fairly specific about
that difference in publication, as in just locality, or is that kind of Democrats versus Republicans?
Well, that's kind of north and south, but yes, there are differences in East and West in language use, that sort of thing. It's much more relaxed on the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. But I think the key thing is the geography is more important. The time zone difference is more important.
Yeah, that was one of the key reasons for us having East and West Coast fulfillment centres is because of that time zone issue. Although I'm just imagining in my head now there's kind of like advertising in sort of Gun Monthly versus advertising in Housewives Weekly or something, being very stereotypical, but it's a very different audience, very, very different demographic as well.
And that's really important, knowing the audience. The first thing about PR is knowing the audience. Who are you talking to, and what do they want to hear? What are they going to consume? So how are they consuming the information, and what do they want to hear? And getting that story right, knowing the audience, is the key thing. So and then you can pick your media, pick where the media is, what level the media is, if you know what the audience is going to consume.
So if we were to try and, I'm trying to think what could we say to budding upcoming entrepreneurs?
I'd say be brave, dare to be different. I'd say be courageous, go out and speak to some journalists after you find out what resonates with you.
I guess one of the things from what you said earlier, but having that content on your own site first, create some good content, find out what your customers want to read.
Absolutely.
That would be a big part for me in that.
Yeah, what resonates with your audience first, test it with your audience, and then go out to the bigger market.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Nice to speak to you, James.
Thanks.
Thank you.